My name is Kenya Quinn, 29 years old. The email arrived on a gray Wednesday, the sort of afternoon when the office lights make everything look a shade too pale. Subject line: Formal dinner invitation, attendance required. Sender: Huxley and Reeves, attorneys at law. Not Daniel, not his assistant, a law firm. I stared as the printer hummed behind me and the chatter of my nonprofit faded to nothing. It didn't read like an invitation. It read like a directive, a summons cut to a single cold paragraph requiring the presence of Mr. Daniel Huxley and his companion, Ms. Kenya Quinn, at Mrs. Margaret Huxley's private residence. No RSVP, no warmth, just a time, a place, and the weight of consequence stuffed into a single line break. Daniel's voice echoed in my head from the night before, the way he says things when he's trying to be casual about something that terrifies him. My mother doesn't do casual, Kenya. With her, everything is a test. He'd slid me a printed list across the coffee table, a ridiculous artifact that still made my throat tighten. Don't talk about your job at the nonprofit. She thinks charity is a mask for failure. Don't mention your parents. They're too ordinary. Keep to safe topics. Auction houses, art history, macroeconomics if you must. Arrive exactly on time. Wear the navy dress. Wear the scarf. Always the scarf, he'd said, as if a strip of cashmere could serve as chainmail. He hadn't smiled. The list looked like survival instructions for a country I had never wanted to visit. By Friday, I had a timetable printed and folded into my purse. 3:45 train, 4:35 taxi, arrival, 10:50 dinner, 5:00 sharp. I pressed the navy dress and ran a lint roller over my single good coat until it complained. The scarf, soft, expensive, utterly not me, felt like an imposter on my skin. I told myself I could live with temporary performance if it meant peace, or at least the absence of blood on the floor. The train rolled out of Hartford, windows smearing the fields gold and green. I watched my reflection flicker against the countryside and tried to memorize Daniel's softer stories, the ones about a mother who used to pack perfect lunches and clap off beat at school concerts. Then came the other stories, partners reduced to stammers by a single glance, dinners where every utensil was a quiz, a life walked through invisible minefields. I gripped the strap of my bag and decided I would rather be myself and fail than become someone else and pass. I reached the suburban station with 15 minutes to spare, crisp air carrying the clean smell of cut grass and wood smoke. A taxi idled at the curb, driver leaning on the horn of his phone, not the car. I waved him off. I needed my legs to remember they belonged to me. The neighborhood looked curated, white fences, lawns so wide they could hold my whole apartment, mailboxes shaped like little mansions. Even the breeze felt expensive. I clutched the white lilies I'd bought for Margaret, understated and correct, the flower equivalent of a handshake. 10 minutes into the walk, a small market came into view, Hearth and Home, its windows stacked with pumpkin pies and flyers that made the world seem kinder than it is. I remembered the bouquet looked naked without a gift bag, an old line of my mother's that suddenly mattered too much. Inside, the store glowed warm and ordinary. Squeak of carts, beeps of scanners, a radio murmuring something about porch lights and October. I grabbed a simple silver bag and joined the line, checking my phone. 4:44, still safe. At the register, an older woman fumbled with a worn wallet and coins that tried to run away, apologizing to the cashier in a voice that trembled with dignity, not drama. Milk, bread, apples, a small frozen turkey. It's 147.86, the cashier said, impatience scraping the words clean. The woman whispered, I thought the card would cover it. People shifted behind her. Someone sighed, loud enough to call itself a virtue. I looked at my phone again. 4:46. 14 minutes to keep a rich woman's rules, or 15 seconds to keep my own. There are moments when your body chooses for you. My hand lifted before my caution could argue. I've got it, I said, sliding my card forward. The woman flinched. No, dear, I can't. Please, I said, gentler. Sometimes we just need a little warmth to start with. The cashier swiped, approved. The receipt curled like a tiny white flag. The woman turned, eyes pale as the sky before dusk, a gratitude so fragile it made my throat ache. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," I said. We stood there a beat, two strangers holding a string no one else could see. Outside, the light had shifted toward evening. I checked my phone, 4:52. A small explosion detonated behind my ribs. I tucked the lilies into the bag, stepped toward the woman to hand it off, and noticed the wind. She shivered inside a coat too thin for the temperature, hands trembling like leaves trying to stay on a branch. The scarf on my neck felt suddenly like a selfishness. I unlooped it and draped it over her shoulders. "Please," I said when she started to refuse. "It's just fabric. You're a person." Her fingers closed around the edge as if it were a rope thrown from shore. "People don't do this anymore." "They should," I said, and then I ran. The long driveway to the Huxley estate unfurled between hedges clipped to within an inch of their soles. Marble statues watched me make poor time. The sky thinned to silver. I arrived breathless at the steps, hair whipped into a halo my comb had never promised. Daniel stood pacing, jaw tight, phone gripped like a reprimand waiting to happen. The moment he saw me, relief flared, then anger slammed a lid on it. 17 minutes, he hissed, voice too low to trigger any security mics and somehow loud enough to color the air. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" There was a woman at the store, Not now," he said, looking past me at the door as if it might open and end his life. "Where's the scarf?" I felt my face tell the story before my mouth did. "I gave it to her," I said. "She was freezing." For a heartbeat, he looked 9 years old, lost in a suit. Then the man reassembled himself out of fear and instruction. "You gave a $700 scarf to a stranger on your way to meet my mother." He laughed once, short as a blade. "Okay." I wanted to explain that the scarf cost less than my dignity and more than my comfort, and I had traded what I could spare. I wanted to say that if punctuality mattered more than people, I was willing to be the villain in this house. Instead, I followed him across a foyer that smelled like polish, money, and the soft panic of disappointing power. A grandfather clock marked time the way a judge taps a pen, steady, disinterested, lethal. Somewhere a butler glided, soundless as a thought. The dining room belonged to another century. Mahogany table that could seat a board of directors, silverware aligned like a geometric proof, fire burning low in a fireplace that existed for aesthetics, not warmth. And at the far end, Margaret Huxley. Silver hair arranged with the precision of a verdict, posture that refused negotiation, eyes the color of winter sun. She looked from Daniel to me, each glance a rapid assessment wrapped in good manners. "Miss Quinn," she said, the syllables placed neatly where her smile should have been. "We've heard so much about you." "Thank you for having me," I said, and my voice did the trick I had rehearsed, steady even while my hands betrayed me. We took our seats. The butler poured wine that smelled like something you make promises over. I reached for my napkin, and the world tilted. Draped over the back of Margaret's chair, casual as an afterthought, lay a navy scarf, my navy scarf, the frayed corner, the small snag from where it had once caught on a bracelet. Impossible, my brain insisted. Coincidence, it lied. Margaret's fingers brushed the fabric as she adjusted it to her shoulders, and a smile moved through her mouth so quickly you could miss it if you blinked in the wrong direction. "Chilly night," she said, conversational as weather. "Yes," I heard myself answer. "It is." Dinner began in a hush, so fine you could hear the stemware breathe. Daniel tried to engage the room in safe topics, auction prices, interest rates, but the conversation kept settling on me like snow that refuses to melt. "You work in community outreach," Margaret said at last, as though choosing the term from a shelf of less flattering options. "We help families and veterans find stable ground," I replied, choosing calm over apology. "A noble project," she said, and somehow made noble sound like quaint. "Though I've always believed assistance is best when it teaches people to stand on their own." "Sometimes," I said, and felt, rather than saw, Daniel's foot press a warning into the floor between us. "They just need a little warmth to start with." Her gaze held mine for a fraction longer than politeness requires. Then, with a small, almost secret curve of her mouth, she looked down at her plate. The clock in the hall kept up its steady count. The fire fed itself delicate twigs. Somewhere, far away, but coming nearer, I could feel the beginning of a story I hadn't been invited to write, but had stepped into anyway. By the time the duck arrived, something lacquered and perfect under a museum glaze, I had stopped tasting. My attention kept orbiting the scarf like a satellite bound to its gravity. Was she the woman from the market? Did she set the stage, or step into it by accident? Why had a law firm sent the invitation? From the corner of my eye, I noticed an embossed leather folio at the sideboard, H&R stamped on the spine. Not menus, documents. The butler saw my glance and moved it an inch, enough to tell me it had been seen. Margaret set down her fork with the softest click. "Miss Quinn," she said, not unkindly, not kindly either. "I imagine this evening has felt instructive." "A little," I admitted. "Good," she said, and this time there was something almost warm under the ice. "Because tonight is only the beginning." I followed her eyes, past Daniel's tight shoulders, past the fire, to the navy scarf resting like a secret on polished wood. It lay there between us like a question mark neither of us was ready to speak aloud. The butler cleared the last of the plates, and the sound of silver against porcelain felt like punctuation. Margaret rose with a composure that made everyone else seem accidental. "Come," she said, her tone smooth as the mahogany walls. "We'll take coffee in the parlor." It wasn't a request. Daniel's hand twitched slightly toward his glass before he followed her lead. I moved behind them, the click of my heels echoing down the corridor, lined with portraits of grim men and polished women whose eyes followed us as if judging our worth. The parlor was magnificent, every inch designed to whisper old money and control. A fire burned in the marble hearth, and the air smelled faintly of cedar polish and coffee beans. Books filled the shelves, untouched but purposeful, the way trophies fill a case. A grand piano sat silent in the corner. Margaret gestured toward the velvet sofa. "Please, Miss Quinn." I sat, hands folded, trying to match her poise. Daniel perched on the edge beside me, like a student summoned for reprimand. Margaret lifted a silver pot and poured coffee into delicate china cups, the liquid dark as ink. "I understand you work for a charity organization," she said, handing me one. The word charity lingered on her tongue as if tasting something slightly sour. "Yes, ma'am," I said, steadying the cup. "Connect Hope? We help struggling families? Veterans mostly?" "Ah." She stirred her coffee with small, precise motions. "People who've made poor choices, I assume." "Some have," I said, meeting her eyes. "Others just had bad luck." Her gaze didn't waver. "And you think kindness can fix them?" Daniel's heel pressed lightly against my shoe under the table, a silent warning. I ignored it. "I think kindness is the only thing that ever does." For a moment, something in her face softened, like a candle guttering before catching again. Then she set down her cup. "You're idealistic," she said. "Idealism is dangerous in this family." The fire cracked, flinging a spark up the chimney. I felt Daniel's tension tighten beside me. He tried to steer the conversation back to safe territory. "Mother, you should see the new property I'm working on." "Later, Daniel," she said, silencing him with a glance. Her attention returned to me. "Do you believe in fate, Miss Quinn?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure, but I believe people cross paths for a reason." Her lips curved faintly. "So do I." Then she turned to her son. "Daniel, dear, would you fetch another bottle of wine from the cellar?" He looked startled. "Mother, we—" "That wasn't a suggestion," she said softly. He rose at once. The door shut behind him, leaving a silence so thick I could hear the fire breathe. Margaret set her cup down carefully, her hands folding in her lap. "Tell me, Kenya," she said, her voice lower now, almost intimate. "What did you do on your way here?" I blinked. "Excuse me? You stopped somewhere." Her tone didn't ask. It confirmed. "A store, perhaps." My throat went dry. Yes, I needed a gift bag for the flowers." Her eyes, pale and sharp, studied my face like a lie detector. "And there was an elderly woman." I swallowed. "She couldn't pay for her groceries, so I helped her." Her fingers traced the edge of her cup. "Helped her?" she echoed. "You mean you paid?" "Yes, about $150. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "That's a great deal of money for a stranger." "It didn't feel like a choice," I said quietly. Her lips tilted slightly. Most good deeds don't. She leaned back, eyes glimmering in the firelight. Do you know what I admire most in people, Miss Quinn? I shook my head. Consistency, she said. The way someone behaves when no one important is watching. Before I could respond, the door opened and Daniel reappeared, a bottle of wine trembling in his grip. Here it is, he said quickly, as though he'd been running. Thank you, dear, Margaret said. Pour for us, will you? He obeyed, the cork popping like a gunshot in the quiet room. When he bent to fill his mother's glass, she said without looking away from me, You told me she was late. Daniel froze mid-pour. Yes, but... She wasn't late because she stopped for vanity or carelessness, Margaret interrupted. She stopped to help a stranger. Did you tell me that part? Daniel stared at her, confusion washing over his face. How could you possibly know that? She adjusted the navy scarf around her shoulders. The fabric glowed soft in the firelight. Because I was there, she said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the faint tick of the clock in the hall, the hiss of wood collapsing into ash. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed again. What are you talking about? He whispered. Margaret's eyes gleamed. I was the woman at the store. The room seemed to shrink. I felt my pulse thudding in my wrists. You... what? I managed. She nodded once, calmly. I wanted to see what kind of person my son was marrying. And now I know. Daniel staggered back as if struck. You set her up? I observed, she corrected, and I learned more in 10 minutes than you've shown me in 35 years. His voice cracked. Mother, how could you... Sit down, Daniel, she said sharply. He did. Margaret turned back to me, and her voice softened. Kindness is rare among the ambitious. Don't ever let anyone convince you it's weakness. The words sank into me, warm and disorienting. For the first time all evening, I felt seen, not as a liability or test subject, but as someone understood. Thank you, I whispered. She smiled then, truly smiled. No, my dear, thank you. Daniel sat rigid, shame radiating from every line of him. His mother poured the wine with serene precision and handed him a glass. Drink, Daniel, she said. You look as though you've seen a ghost. I can't believe this, he muttered, voice low. You disguised yourself. This was cruel. Was it? She asked, tilting her head. I've spent my life surrounded by people who perform decency only when it serves them. I needed to see what she would do when she believed no one important was watching. Daniel's jaw tightened. And if she'd walked past? Margaret's tone was measured but cold. Then I'd know she didn't belong in this family. Her eyes flicked to me, the faintest apology hiding behind steel. But she didn't walk past. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or invaded. My act of kindness had been witnessed, orchestrated, evaluated. I sat very still, the fire painting my reflection in the polished brass of the fireplace. You planned all of this, I said quietly. The invitation, the timing, everything. Margaret's mouth curved faintly. A controlled environment reveals truth better than polite conversation. You'd be amazed how people behave when their schedule and comfort are at risk. Daniel's voice trembled. So the email from your lawyers, was that part of it too? Her glance toward the sideboard was almost imperceptible. Huxley and Reeves handle many things, she said, some more significant than dinner invitations. The implication hung in the air like a storm cloud, and my eyes flicked again to the embossed folder I'd noticed earlier. She followed my gaze, but didn't elaborate. Perhaps we'll discuss that another evening, she said. The firelight shifted, catching the edges of her rings and the faint tremor in her hands. For a heartbeat, she looked almost humanly tired. You remind me of someone, she said softly. Your husband? I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes met mine, and something raw flickered through the composure. Yes, she said at last. Before the money, before the power. He believed that empathy was a form of strength. I used to think so too. Daniel's breath caught. Mother... Enough, she said gently but firmly. You've spent years confusing discipline with worth, Daniel. I see where that came from now. He dropped his gaze. I was just trying to make you proud. Her voice softened, trembling at the edges. You can't earn pride by fear. It's given when it's deserved. The fire popped, sending a spark upward. The scent of smoke and cedar thickened the air. None of us moved. After a long silence, Margaret stood. Come, she said. Let's return to the dining room. I think we've all learned what we came here to learn. I rose on unsteady legs. As we stepped back into the corridor, the portraits on the walls seemed less judgmental, more watchful, as though the house itself had been holding its breath. The clock struck 9, its chime rolling through the marble halls. Daniel followed a step behind his mother, his voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? She didn't turn. Now, she said, we see who can live with the truth. And as we walked back toward the glowing dining room, I realized this evening had never really been about dinner, or even about approval. It was about exposure, about what power does when it wants to know if your soul bends or stands. The scarf brushed her shoulder as she moved, a soft banner of everything I had risked to stay human. Somewhere deep down, I understood she wasn't done testing me. The night had only just begun. The next morning, sunlight leaked through Daniel's apartment blinds in narrow, accusing lines. The night before replayed in my mind like a scene I hadn't been allowed to direct. Margaret's calm confession, Daniel's stunned silence, my own heart thrumming between admiration and unease. I stared at the untouched coffee Daniel had made and said quietly, "She planned it all, didn't she?" Daniel rubbed his temples. "You don't understand my mother. She orchestrates. Everything. Always has." "She doesn't seem like a woman who does anything without reason," I said. He laughed dryly. "That's one way to put it. Another is, she doesn't trust anyone until they've passed a test they didn't know they were taking." I hesitated. "And what about you?" He met my eyes, then looked away. "I've failed most of them." We sat in silence. Outside, traffic hummed and life went on, indifferent to the moral experiments of the rich. I thought of Margaret's words. Kindness is rare among the ambitious. She'd meant it as a compliment, but it had sounded like a challenge. By the end of that week, a letter arrived. Not an email this time, but a cream envelope sealed with the Huxley crest. Daniel stared at it like it might explode. "She wants to see you," he said finally, "without me." My stomach tightened. Did she say why? He shook his head. "She never does." Margaret's foundation occupied the top floor of an old stone building downtown, its lobby polished to a mirror sheen. The receptionist smiled professionally and gestured me toward a private conference room. Margaret was already there, standing by the window, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. She looked smaller than she had in the mansion, yet somehow even more commanding. "Kenya," she said, gesturing to a chair. "I hope you don't mind the formality. I find clarity thrives in daylight." "I don't mind," I said, though the knot in my stomach disagreed. She studied me for a moment. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about what you said, that kindness is the only thing that truly fixes people." "I remember," I said carefully. She turned back to the window. "My foundation has lost that principle. It's bloated, bureaucratic, obsessed with efficiency over empathy. I could use someone who still believes in what you said." I blinked. "You're offering me a job?" "Not yet," she said. "A test, perhaps." Her lips twitched at her own irony. "I'm convening the board tomorrow. I'd like you to sit in, observe, contribute if you wish. The board needs reminding of what heart looks like." Something in her tone made me uneasy. "And Daniel?" She hesitated, a shadow crossing her face. "Daniel will attend, but this isn't about him, not entirely." The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and oak. 7 people sat around the long table, all crisp suits and practiced smiles. Daniel took a seat near the end, avoiding my eyes. Margaret opened the meeting with quiet authority. "Our agenda today concerns leadership succession within the Huxley Foundation," she said. "It's time to consider the next generation." A man at the far end, sleek hair, tailored arrogance, cleared his throat. "Margaret, if this is about grooming Daniel for your role, we've discussed—" "It's not," she said flatly. "It's about ensuring the foundation doesn't rot from comfort." The man's smile faltered. "And who exactly decides what comfort looks like?" "I do," she said. "For now." Her gaze shifted to me. "This is Miss Kenya Quinn. Some of you may recall her from our recent dinner." A few polite nods, one disdainful glance. "She represents a perspective we've lost." The man leaned forward, predator curious. "A social worker, correct? You run a charity?" "Connect Hope," I said evenly. "We partner with local communities to rebuild stability for veterans and families in crisis." He smiled thinly. "Admirable. But philanthropy, Miss Quinn, requires measurable impact. Sentiment doesn't balance ledgers." "Neither does cynicism," I said before I could stop myself. A murmur rippled around the table. Margaret's eyes flickered with the faintest pride. The man chuckled. "Tell me then, how do you ensure the money you give isn't wasted on people who won't change?" I met his gaze. "By remembering that change isn't a transaction, it's a process. We invest in people, not outcomes." He leaned back, smirking, spoken like someone who's never had to manage a budget. Before I could respond, Margaret's voice cut clean through the tension. That will do, Mr. Kramer. The room fell silent. She folded her hands on the table. The Foundation's wealth is secure. Its purpose is not. That's what concerns me. Daniel finally spoke, his voice strained but steady. Mother, maybe we could find a balance. Structure and compassion. Margaret's gaze softened. Perhaps. But tell me, Daniel, would you have believed that before last week? He looked down. No. Then I suppose your education is already underway, she said. A faint rustle of discomfort passed around the board. I could feel their skepticism turning toward me. The outsider, the uninvited conscience. That's when I noticed the folder in front of Kramer. Its corner bore the faint embossed initials H&R, Huxley and Reeves, the same firm that had sent my invitation. Before the meeting ended, he closed it a little too quickly. Afterward, as people drifted out, Margaret approached me. You held your own well, she said. Kramer's not used to being challenged without profit in sight. I wasn't trying to challenge him, I said, just to answer honestly. That's precisely why he felt challenged, she replied. Honesty unsettles people who rely on performance. She paused. I'd like you to consult for the Foundation for a time. See where the rot has set in. I hesitated. Margaret, I work full-time at Connect Hope. I'm not asking you to leave, she said. Just lend me your truth now and then. I think we both know I've misplaced mine. Her candor caught me off guard. I'll help, I said quietly. She smiled, small, genuine. Good. There's much to do. But truth, once invited in, doesn't stay polite. That evening, Daniel arrived at my apartment, shoulders tight, tie undone. You shouldn't have gone to that meeting, he said. I was invited, I replied. Exactly. By her. She's pulling you into her games. I think she's trying to clean them up. He laughed bitterly. You really think she's changed? She doesn't offer power unless she's testing how you'll use it. Maybe, I said. But she sees something in you too, Daniel. Something she still hopes to trust. He paced, hands gripping his hair. You don't get it, Kenya. There's more at stake here than dinner invitations and speeches about kindness. The Foundation isn't just charity, it's control. Whoever runs it decides where millions go. People fight wars over less. His words chilled me. Is that why she wanted me there? I don't know, he said. But if I were you, I'd watch your back around her board, especially Kramer. He's been circling that seat for years. 2 days later, a small article appeared in the Hartford Business Review. Huxley Foundation considers unorthodox successor candidate. Beneath it, a blurred photo of me and Margaret leaving the building. My name spelled correctly. The tone, smugly skeptical. I called Daniel. Did you see it? He sighed. Kramer's work, probably. He leaks when he's nervous. Why would he be nervous? Because my mother's finally unpredictable again. That night, as I scrolled through the online comments, one stopped my breath cold. An anonymous post read, Ask her about the grocery store stunt. It was staged for sympathy. Attached was a grainy still, me at the checkout, card in hand. The caption, Nice act for the cameras. I stared at the image, a chill crawling up my spine. Someone had been there, filming. And whoever they were, they wanted to rewrite what kindness looked like. I didn't sleep. Somewhere between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m., I found myself wondering not who had taken the photo, but why someone thought it was worth taking at all. Margaret had said, Tonight is only the beginning. I was starting to understand what she meant, because in her world, truth wasn't just tested, it was weaponized. And this time, the target was me. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Texts, calls, headlines multiplying like mold. Charity workers' act of kindness, exposed as publicity stunt. Each notification chipped at my pulse until it was a steady hammer behind my ribs. I sat at my desk at Connect Hope, surrounded by photos of families we'd helped, the hum of printers, the smell of burnt coffee, and tried to breathe through the noise. My coworker, Mina, leaned over the cubicle wall, holding her phone. Kenya, she whispered, you're trending. I forced a dry laugh. So is the flu. Her face tightened. They're saying the grocery thing was fake, that you and the cashier set it up. I looked at her blank. What cashier? The one from the Hearth and Home Market. Someone posted a clip, blurry, but it looks like security footage. There's a timestamp, but the numbers flicker. People are calling it charity theater. The words sank like stones. I clicked the link she sent. There I was, frozen mid-gesture, card extended. The headline shouted its accusation. Someone had spliced the video with commentary about modern-day social climbers. The comment section was a carnival of cynicism, too perfect to be real, scripted guilt performance. Huxley Foundation loves a sob story. My stomach turned. This isn't possible, I said softly. Who would? Someone with money, Mina said. Security footage doesn't leak itself. By noon, Margaret called. Her voice was calm, clipped, the way people sound when they've already been planning their response. Kenya, we need to talk. My office. Now. When I arrived, she was standing by the same window as before, the city gleaming cold behind her. Daniel was already there, arms crossed, face gray with fatigue. Margaret gestured toward the folder on her desk. Kramer brought this to my attention early this morning, she said. He seems concerned. I sat slowly. About what? She opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots, the video, the comments, the headlines. He believes this scandal disqualifies you from any association with the foundation. Daniel exhaled sharply. He would. I met Margaret's gaze. Do you believe it? Her eyes flickered, and for the first time I saw uncertainty there. I don't know what to believe yet, she said, but I intend to find out. Kramer entered without knocking, his smile already rehearsed. Good morning. Quite a predicament, isn't it? Margaret's tone sharpened. You're late, Richard. He ignored her and turned to me. Miss Quinn, these things happen. Public perception can be fragile. Fortunately, there are ways to mitigate damage. A formal apology, perhaps a statement admitting misjudgment. I didn't do anything wrong, I said. He chuckled. Of course not, but appearances. Enough, Margaret said. I'll handle this internally. Kramer's smile thinned. Of course. He gathered his papers and left, but not before giving Daniel a look that promised more trouble. When the door closed, Margaret leaned forward. Do you have the receipt from that store? I blinked. Yes, I keep all my receipts for work reimbursements. I fished through my bag, hands trembling, and found it. Here. She examined it carefully, then placed it beside a printout from the video. Notice anything? The timestamp on the video read 4:17 p.m. The receipt said 4:37 p.m. Daniel frowned. The times don't match. Exactly, Margaret said, which means the footage was doctored. I felt my breath catch. So someone faked it. She nodded. Someone with access to both surveillance and motivation. Her gaze drifted toward the door, and Richard Kramer has both. Daniel looked stricken. Mother, if he's behind this, then we'll prove it, she said. That evening, Margaret arranged a quiet meeting at the foundation after hours. Just the three of us and the head of security, a man named Alan Pierce, whose loyalty seemed carved in stone. He connected his laptop to the projector, pulling up archived security files from the Hearth and Home Markets server. The footage circulating online is cropped and spliced, he said, clicking through frames. Here's the original. On the screen, the scene unfolded in raw clarity. The old woman's trembling hands. My card sliding through the reader. The cashier's nod. The timestamp, 4:36 p.m. There, Alan said, freezing the image. This matches the receipt. No edit, no cut. Margaret folded her arms. And the copy online? Alan typed a few commands. A second window opened. The fake version flickered with faint distortions every 3 seconds. Inserted frames, he explained. Likely rendered from external software. Meaning? Daniel asked. Meaning someone accessed the store's security system remotely, downloaded the footage, altered it, and leaked it. Margaret's voice dropped. Can you trace where the upload came from? Alan's fingers danced over the keys. Lines of code scrolled. Then he stopped. Well, this is interesting. The video was uploaded from a private server registered to Huxley and Reeves. The silence that followed was ice. Daniel spoke first. The law firm? Margaret's jaw tightened. Kramer's brother sits on their board. I felt my stomach knot. So this was coordinated. Yes, she said, her voice like flint. A calculated smear. Alan leaned back. With your permission, ma'am, I can prepare a report and present it to the board tomorrow. Margaret shook her head. No, we're not confronting them yet. She looked at me. We're going to let them believe they've succeeded. Daniel frowned. Mother, why? Her lips curved into something between a smile and a snarl. Because people reveal their true faces when they think they've won. The next morning, the board convened again. The atmosphere crackled with artificial sympathy. Kramer began with a theatrical sigh. Before we proceed, I must address the unfortunate incident surrounding Miss Quinn. While I admire your passion for unorthodox methods, this foundation cannot afford association with, shall we say, manufactured heroism. Margaret's expression remained neutral. Of course, proceed. He blinked, thrown off balance. Well, I suggest we distance ourselves immediately. Daniel leaned forward. On what evidence? Kramer produced a USB drive. The video speaks for itself. Margaret gestured for him to plug it in. By all means, let's watch. The lights dimmed, the doctored clip played on the large screen. Murmurs rippled through the room. When it ended, Margaret looked around. Anything else? Anything? Kramer smirked. I think that suffices. Agreed, she said, folding her hands. Now, Mr. Pierce, if you would. Alan, who had been standing quietly near the door, stepped forward. What you just saw was an altered file, he said, connecting his laptop. This is the original security footage, verified by the store's server log. The real video filled the screen. Gasps replaced murmurs. The timestamps aligned perfectly. The narrative flipped in seconds. Margaret turned to Kramer. Would you care to explain how a fabricated video, uploaded from your law firm's server, found its way online? Kramer's composure cracked. That's absurd. Enough, Margaret said. I built this foundation to serve truth, not ambition. You've forgotten the difference. She rose, her presence filling the room. Effective immediately, you are relieved of all duties. Security will escort you from the premises. Kramer's face drained of color. You can't. I can, she said, and I just did. He stormed out, leaving behind the faint smell of panic. When the room cleared, Margaret sank into her chair, suddenly older. You handled yourself with grace, she said. You could have demanded a public apology. I don't need one, I said. Truth's enough. She studied me for a long moment. Then perhaps you understand leadership better than most. She reached into her desk, pulling out a single envelope embossed with the foundation's seal. I want you to join our advisory board, Kenya, not as a pawn, as a compass. I stared at it. I'm not sure I'm qualified. She smiled faintly. That's exactly why you are. Daniel looked at me, awe and guilt tangled in his eyes. You saved her legacy, he said quietly. I shook my head. No, she saved it herself. I just refused to look away. Margaret rose, crossing to the window. The city reflected in the glass like 1,000 small lives waiting for mercy. The world remembers power, she said softly, but it needs kindness. Her words hung there, echoing the lesson she'd tested me for from the very beginning. And for the first time, I believed she meant them. 3 weeks passed before the noise died down. The tabloids moved on, the online mobs found new scandals, and the Huxley Foundation stabilized under Margaret's quiet command. The smear had backfired spectacularly. Donors increased their support, citing the grace under fire that had restored faith in real philanthropy. I'd never intended to become a symbol of anything. I just wanted to breathe again. Daniel and I hadn't spoken much since the boardroom reckoning. He'd retreated into long hours, and apologies left unsent. One afternoon, as I packed up reports at Connect Hope, he appeared at my office door, holding a bouquet of lilies, the same kind I'd brought to his mother's dinner weeks before. I didn't know what else to bring, he said softly. Flowers seemed safe. They're beautiful, I said. You didn't have to. I did, he interrupted. I was awful. I let fear turn me into someone I swore I'd never be. You deserve better than suspicion. I looked at him for a long moment. And what changed your mind? He gave a small, helpless laugh. You did. You stood in front of a room full of sharks and never raised your voice. You just told the truth and let it speak for itself. Watching you that day, I realized I've spent my life performing for approval instead of earning respect. I exhaled, tension unspooling from my shoulders. It's never too late to change that. He nodded. I know. That's why I quit the expansion project. I'm joining one of your field initiatives instead. Connect Hope's Veterans Housing Rebuild. My eyebrows lifted. You, manual labor? Consider it penance, he said with a half smile. For the first time in months, I believed him. Margaret invited me to lunch the following week. This time, not in her mansion or her foundation's glass office, but in a quiet cafe near the courthouse. No chauffeur, no pearls, no scarf, just a gray sweater and a pair of reading glasses perched on her head. When I arrived, she looked up and smiled with something I hadn't seen before, ease. I never thanked you properly, she said. You don't have to, I replied. I do, she insisted. You reminded me that kindness isn't supposed to be strategic. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. My husband used to say, power without empathy is bankruptcy of the soul. I think I spent too many years rich in everything but that. Her honesty disarmed me. You've changed, Margaret. She chuckled. Old dogs, new tricks. Or maybe I just remembered who I was before the money. She stirred her tea, thoughtful. When I lost my husband, everyone around me wanted something, comfort or advantage. I stopped trusting both. But that day in the grocery store, when you didn't know who I was, you gave me something I didn't realize I'd lost. What's that? I asked. Faith, she said softly. That goodness still exists when no one's watching. I swallowed hard. For all her sharpness, this was the first time her words felt light. She smiled faintly. Do you still have the scarf? I laughed. I should be asking you that. She nodded. Every night I hang it by my bedside. It reminds me that generosity doesn't always come wrapped in perfection. When Daniel and I married that fall, we didn't do it at the Huxley estate. Margaret refused. Too cold, she said. Too many ghosts. Instead, she insisted on my parents' backyard, a string of lights, folding chairs, and a breeze that smelled like autumn. She arrived early wearing a navy dress and, of course, the same cashmere scarf. The ceremony was small, simple, honest. My mother baked pies instead of hiring caterers, and my father walked me down a gravel path that crunched with every step. When I reached the altar, Daniel's eyes were wet. You look like home, he whispered. Margaret stood front row, clutching a glass of sparkling cider instead of champagne. When the officiant said, Does anyone have cause to object? She smiled at me and mouthed, You passed. After the vows, as we stood before our families, she raised her glass. There are moments in life, she began, her voice steady and clear, when we're asked to choose between what looks proper and what feels right. I used to believe the world rewarded the proper. Now I know it remembers the right. To Kenya, who reminded me that kindness, when given freely, has a way of coming home. Applause rippled through the small crowd, but I couldn't look away from her. The scarf shimmered in the porch lights, the same one I'd given away to a stranger who'd never really been a stranger at all. I leaned toward her and whispered, Keep it. She smiled. Oh, I intend to. Later, after the last guest left and the lanterns swayed softly in the cool air, Daniel and I sat on the porch steps, shoes abandoned, hands intertwined. The yard glowed with faint traces of laughter and music. You know, he said, voice quiet. I spent years believing my mother's approval was the only thing that mattered. But that night at her dinner table showed me something else. What's that? I asked. He looked at me, eyes gentle. You can't earn love by impressing people. You earn it by doing what's right when no one expects you to. I smiled. Sounds like something your mother would say now. He laughed softly. She's learning from you, too. Months passed, and the Huxley Foundation transformed. Margaret reinstated programs she'd once dismissed as inefficient. Community kitchens, outreach for single parents, scholarships for veterans. She invited me to sit on the board officially, not as a figurehead, but as a conscience. During one meeting, she caught me glancing at a set of numbers on a grant proposal and said, Kenya, if compassion had a ledger, the world would be richer than it knows. I found myself smiling more easily around her. The sharp edges remained. Margaret would always be Margaret, but they'd softened into purpose. One evening, after a late board session, she walked me to the elevator and said quietly, You know, Daniel told me he's been volunteering every Saturday, building homes, manual work. I laughed. He said it's penance. She nodded. It's progress. Perhaps one day it will be joy. She paused. And you've changed him more than I ever could. Don't underestimate what goodness does when it refuses to bend. The elevator chimed open. Before stepping in, I asked, And you, Margaret, have you forgiven yourself for the test? Her smile wavered. Not entirely, but I've learned something better than forgiveness. What's that? Gratitude, she said, for being proven wrong. Years later, every time I walked past a grocery store, I found myself slowing down, scanning the checkout lines, remembering. I'd see people fumble for coins. Others look away in discomfort, and I'd think of that night, the fear, the choice, the scarf. Sometimes I'd help, sometimes I'd just smile. Either way, the moment always felt like a quiet thread back to everything that had changed. Because that single act of kindness hadn't just rewritten my life, it had rewritten an entire family's idea of worth. Margaret passed away 5 years later, peacefully, in her sleep. At the memorial, Daniel handed me a small box tied with navy ribbon. Inside was the scarf, folded neatly, still soft, still carrying her perfume. A note in her handwriting read, "For Kenya. Not all gifts are meant to be returned, but some find their way home." I pressed the fabric to my face, tears blurring the ink. So, if you're hearing this story now, ask yourself, what would you have done that day in the grocery store? Would you have hurried past, or would you have stopped? Because sometimes the smallest choice, the one no one notices, becomes the one the world remembers. Kindness doesn't ask for attention. It just asks to be done.